Welcome to Financial Footsteps, Candid Conversations with Financial Leaders, the podcast that takes you deep into the minds of the masters behind the numbers. Join host Chad Dean as he connects with financial leaders as they share their journeys so that we can gain valuable insight from their failures and triumphs. Get ready for candid conversations, behind-the-scenes anecdotes, and practical wisdom that will transform the way you think about your career in finance. Put down the balance sheet and listen in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financial Footsteps, where we explore the background and careers of financial leaders for the benefit of those who want to follow in their footsteps. My name is Chad Dean, your host. I've been a recruiter for 27 years, and I'm the owner and CEO of Integrated Management Resources, a Phoenix-based executive recruiting firm established 33 years ago. Integrated is the sponsor of this podcast today, and I am very excited about our guest today, Ryan Bowen. Ryan has had a long career in accounting and finance and is full of wisdom that I know will be incredible and beneficial to our listeners. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thanks, Chad. Thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely.
And happy to share any wisdom you may think I have.
Well, I don't know if we're going to have time to get all of your wisdom, but we'll do the best that we can.
Sounds good.
So, where are you right now?
I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, joining you remotely. Recently moved there from the Phoenix area. I moved to a hybrid schedule with my company, Cambridge Investment Research. Our main headquarters is in Iowa, with a secondary one in the Phoenix area that's fastly growing.
Well, you do the opposite of what most people do. So you spent the summer here and then you left to go spend the winter in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So we'll see how that works out for you.
Yeah, I mean, mistakes are the greatest teachers, right? So learn from my failure there.
Yeah. Well, I am in Phoenix. The weather's finally cooling down. We're hitting our fall weather, which means it's only going to be 96 today. So we're really excited about that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Ryan, on the personal side. People like to hear that. So tell us a little about where you grew up, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll start from the beginning. I grew up in a small town in South Dakota called Colton, about 800 people. I grew up in a family business, a family lumberyard that my grandpa actually started about 60 years ago after World War II. Then my dad took that over with my uncle. I worked on that lumberyard since I was probably 12 years old every summer. I did a lot of sports growing up. Basketball was my key sport. I was fortunate enough to go to the University of South Dakota, where I ran track, was a founding father of TEAC, fraternity. Really started my career at Deloitte & Touche in Omaha, Nebraska, where Berkshire Hathaway was my main client. So it was pretty cool to be part of Warren Buffett's empire for a while and see how the sausage was made there. And
wow.
I've seen a lot of different things in my career, but right now, I have a newborn son who's 3 months old today. His name's Bodie, with my awesome, gorgeous wife, Brittany. So yeah, a lot of changes for me. And I would say becoming a new dad is probably harder than, anything I've done in my past, but really rewarding.
Well, congratulations to you. How do you describe a newborn to people? It's been so long for me. What do you tell people it's like?
I think there's a lot of joy, but it's not always fun. So it's almost like a startup experience where you're going through. There's a lot of costs with a startup. You have baby things you're buying you've never had to buy before. You're in new experiences you've never seen. There's people out there, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, family, friends, they're telling you how it works, what works best. And really what it comes down to is just understanding what works best for you and your partner. And to me, it's communication, being aligned. And maybe it's the accountant in me or the finance person in me. I'm always trying to solve problems, but you can't stop a baby from crying at all times. So you just gotta live with that, and just be there,
Oh yeah, the way that I thought about it, the way that I got through it mentally, because neither one of my boys slept for a year and a half. So the way I looked at it is I'm in Navy SEAL training. If the Navy SEALs can stay up for days on end, then I can handle it. And that's just the way that I went through it. And the way I looked at it also is this too shall pass. So you'll get through it. I know it.
On that note, it's embrace the suck, right?
Oh, so exactly.
You got to think of other people can have done it. I know I can do it. But then those nights when they're crying in your same room crying, you have to realize too, like, they're not going to be there forever and you're going to miss those moments. So I think I've been fortunate to have a kid later in life to where I don't take everything for granted.
Right. My dad was a teak too. So we've got that a little bit in common.
Okay. I like him already.
So I'm looking at your background, and it looks like you have an undergrad, but then you have 2 masters. Is that right?
That's right. So coming out of school at USD, I wanted to be a CPA who has the 150 credit degree requirement. So I went ahead and got my master's in accounting there. But as I went through my career and starting out in audit, I realized that I'm not just a pure accountant. I'm more of a business strategist, and I really want to focus on businesses growing. So I wanted to invest in myself more. So I got my MBA at Creighton with a focus in leadership. Learned so much there that I think has maybe given me a competitive advantage in the market in helping businesses grow. It's not just about the numbers. There's a lot of things to think about from a leadership perspective on what you bring to a team and company that I learned there.
Gotcha. When did you go back and get that MBA?
I did it. It took me about 4 years when I was working. So at the time, my company paid for the MBA. So I took night classes, did it over weekends. I probably couldn't do that now with a kid, but I was fortunate enough early in my career, I didn't have any ties. So I invested in myself.
That's fantastic. I did the same thing. So I have a biology degree, which doesn't do you any good in business. And I decided that I wanted to get some business education. So I went and got my MBA. Same thing, did it at night, worked full time, got it done, thankfully, right before my first son was born, because trying to do that with a kid would be, it'd be impossible, like you just said.
I have to laugh, Chad, because I didn't know you were a biology major to begin with. So I started out in pre-med in biology and chemistry. So, at the time, you always have these dreams. I want to be a doctor and do this, great pay, right? But in reality, I couldn't handle blood or needles. So went the business route.
All right. So that's a great segue. I always ask our guests, what was the genesis of going into accounting or finance? And so let's hit that right now.
Yeah. And I think, me being a firstborn, you always set really high standards for myself. And I don't know if that was because I felt like I owed it to myself or because I wanted to make my parents proud. So I started out as a pre-med, at USD, running track, fraternity. But after a year, my grades weren't great. It just wasn't my natural skill ability. There were way smarter pre-med students ahead of me doing way better. And I had to take that summer to really just reflect on what made me. And growing up in a lumberyard, there was things I was really, really good at a young age. So, for example, you could get some plans, which my dad would give me, and he'd say, hey, here's a house that needs to be built, and they need 3,600 square feet of 2x4 lumbers to frame the house. Go find it. So there was no lengths, there was no dimensions. So, and you only had so much inventory you could use to pick from. And you had to think about how you loaded a truck, and you only had so much space to put within a truck. And you knew which volumes were more frequent of lumber. So you had to start playing different numbers games in your mind of, okay, I'm going to have maybe so many 12-footers, so many 10-footers, so many 8-footers. I know we have a lot of inventory out back for this, so we bought it at a really low cost, so there's going to be higher margin. And I know if I go order 16-footers, that's going to be really expensive, but there's a few here, so maybe I can cut those in half. So it was almost building that puzzle to begin with. And at the time at the lumberyard, we didn't have all the smartphones, the apps, things to keep track of the numbers. So I did a lot of these things in my head, and just kind of numbers naturally just came to me. And at the same token, I love to, I don't know if it's the Irish in me or what it is, but I love to cut costs or do things really efficiently. So my dad and uncle allowed me to get on the phone with vendors and negotiate different deals before I was even 18 to get better pricing. I should have asked for a commission if I was smart. So that's something I go tell my younger self, right? But I think just reflecting on that, I went back to the lumberyard that summer, did it, and I'm like, hey, like how could I become a business leader one day, and how could I use my skills? So I knew I was good at numbers, fairly good with people. I like to negotiate, so I really wanted to figure out the bones of a company. So that's why I really went into finance and accounting after that. Again, I was trying to catch up on my GPA afterwards because that pre-med route didn't do me any favors starting out with.
Yeah, I get it. So, what was it about it? Was there a mentor? How did you go, oh, accounting must be it if I like numbers?
Yeah, I actually had an uncle who was a CPA and CFO, and he'd done really well for himself. So obviously I started looking at like what jobs are in demand, because I didn't want to go down a route where there was no career for me. So kind of thinking of the end in mind. And I had a few ideas of engineering, accounting, finance. And I wouldn't consider myself your traditional accountant, because when you first tell me accountant, I think at that time I would have thought bean counter, QuickBooks, like that's not meant for me. I need to be out with people. But I really relied on him a bit to tell me about his career and journey. And his advice was, you're not going to do yourself any harm starting out in finance or accounting. You can start there, but the network you build, the knowledge you build, you can build on those other skill sets of yours, whether it's marketing, sales, procurement, whatever route you want to go down. But if you have these financial basics down to know how a company makes money and how you can add value, like that's a great starting block for your career. So it just made sense to me, and that's what I did.
Great. Did it come easy to you? Did you get your grades back up?
Yeah, it took me about 3 years to catch up. I just made sure in all my accounting and finance courses, they were all A's, so I could show a 4.0 there. The blended average wasn't as high, but it is something I could talk through in my interview processes as I was going through that, trying to find internships in my career down the road.
So how did Deloitte get their hands on you?
I'll be so honest with you here that I was heading into my senior year of college, and I don't know if it's just because growing up in South Dakota, you weren't as exposed to things like South Dakota, you have no NFL, you have no professional teams. The first time I even went out on an airplane, I was 21 years old. So I lived a pretty restricted life. So in my college program, I didn't even know what a Big Four firm was. I'd never even heard of Deloitte and KPMG. I was thinking more like on the corporate side, where could I fit in? A professor came to me and she's like, hey, I see you didn't sign up for this career fair. Deloitte and KPMG are going to be there. I think you'd be a great cultural fit there. I was just like, what are you talking about? Who are they? And then she explained it to me a bit. I'm like, okay, I'll give this a shot. So I just joined those career fairs, got to know them. I spoke with them, and I didn't take an internship with them right away, but I at least got to know them. I hung around the Sioux Falls area, actually at a hog manufacturing plant, John Morrell, and I took a cost internship there while I was getting my master's in accounting. And then the year after that, with those connections I built, I joined Deloitte from there in Omaha.
Got it. Did you know what you were getting yourself into?
No, not quite. And I know University of South Dakota, they're a really good school. They really prepare you for the CPA certification, I would say. But if you look at, so I went into audit to begin with, which I probably should have gone into consulting. I would have been better at that. But you have a couple of auditing classes in college, and it's all, it's not as much experience based. It's more just theory. And so you're you're trying to think about everything I know about accounting. How do I apply that to auditing? So then you get into the real world without having that prior internship experience, where people who joined in my class at Deloitte were all prior interns. I was like the only one who wasn't. So they knew what to expect. And I kind of saw it more from a corporate side, like, okay, let's track the P&L, the profitability, which products should we go into and why. But I wasn't as prepared to say, hey, are you doing this correctly? Why? What are the risks? Having that level of professional skepticism to ensure the companies were doing it accurately. I would say I wasn't as well prepared as I would have liked to be.
So was it traditional in the Omaha office, the same as most other offices, where you're grinding during busy season and busy at quarter ends and stuff? Was it the same in that office?
It was the same. I mean, we were working 80 to 85 hours some weeks during quarter ends, year ends. Berkshire Hathaway, I was more on the insurance side, which has a lot of regulatory reporting over the summers. So you also had those deadlines you were meeting. You also had other clients. So it was like, fortunately at that time, I was single, no kids. I could dedicate myself to that, which was almost learning in dog years, because you think about it, you're almost working twice as much, and you're seeing best practices from some of these companies, and you're working around a lot of bright people that are much smarter than you and experienced. So if you can be a sponge and absorb that, I'm a big believer you can move your career light years further ahead than just working that 40-hour per week job. I know a lot of people are about like work-life balance, which is great, and I think that's a thing too, but I still, maybe it's the Midwest values in me. If you want to succeed in life, you have to put the hours in, and really just be a sponge to move forward.
Yeah, that's a thing these days, isn't it? It's like the younger generation, it comes in with the work-life balance expectation, but then you see these things on LinkedIn where, hey, I built a $500 million company, but I didn't sleep for 2 years because I had to work my tail off. So if you want to build something great, I don't know in this day and age that you can accomplish that with a work-life balance. But what does work-life balance mean? It's individual as well, right? So
Yeah.
if you can still go out for a hike, but you're working 12 hours and you still get a 1 hour hike in, and then still get 8 hours of sleep and plenty of time to do other things. So I think
Well,
that's individual.
I agree. And I think one point I'd like to make, I think that could be a competitive advantage to someone too, if they're willing to do that where the rest of the pack won't. That's one way you can easily stand out, where maybe the rest of the pack used to do that in the past. I think the second thing to your point of, getting a hike, is you have to know yourself and what fuels your battery. So for me, it's every morning I either start my day out with a workout or an hour walk. I'm not checking email. I'm not looking at text. I'm making sure I'm getting up early enough to kind of progress in my day. And I can't think of where I've had a bad day where I've worked out and just felt mentally better. I mean, and I think that's something, a lot of people think about that as physical. That's great for me, but I think to me it's more of a mental thing than anything, that allows me to think clearly through the day and also burn some stress out.
That's my man. I'm the same thing. I get up. I'm not going to tell everybody what they might think I'm crazy, how early I get up, but I drink some coffee, wake up, and then work out, run, ride my stationary bike, something like that, and get that exercise out of the way. And then I am charged for the day. People are like, well, I get tired afterwards. I'm charged. I'm ready to
Oh,
go. Because at
same.
the end of the day, I'm too worked up. I just don't want to go and do a workout. I'm just mentally fried
Oh,
and everything. So let's get that out early. It
yep.
charges you up. And so I
No,
love that. That's
no,
fantastic.
I agree. And I think too, at the end of the day, then work-life balance, you can dedicate that time to your family, your loved ones. You might not have much energy to contribute, but I don't, like you said, I'm not going to be working out after hard days of work, and then have that balance with my life as well.
Yeah. So you do 2.5 years of audit. Where were you towards the end of that? Were you like, okay, I need to get back onto my business side of things? Where were you mentally?
Yeah. So at that point in time, I started to think, where do I want to be 10, 20 years from now? And just like a product development team, you always want to start with the end in mind. So I didn't per se say, hey, I want to be a CFO in 10, 15 years, but I knew I wanted to be a business leader, and I knew I didn't want to be an audit partner. So it kind of came to process of elimination. So at that point in time, I looked at the things on my resume that I had. I had the Big Four experience. I earned the CPA. I had the master's in accounting. I've seen Fortune 500 companies and how they operate, but I also knew I was never part of that Fortune 500 machine internally to grow. So I said, okay, that's a skill set I could get. Secondly, I've at that point only worked on domestic companies. And at that point in time, this was 2008, 2010, after the GFC, global companies were starting to become more and more popular. So I was also in the back of my mind thinking, okay, how do I get global company exposure? And then at the same time, I started thinking, okay, those are good skills to have. Then you've only seen big things. What about small things? How could I get in a startup one day or a middle market company? So by the time I'm a little older, I would say I'm a veteran person, and I've seen a lot of different things. Just so when challenges come at me, maybe I've seen it before. So that's where I pivoted to ConAgra Foods, a Fortune 500 company in Omaha. Had an awesome internal audit department. What I loved about it, it was more like a consulting department. They put me more on the operational engagements, where I got to go try and improve processes, map things out, work with the business. So I really just flourished there, getting to know myself in the business and where my strengths were. And I was like, okay, I'm a little better at improving processes, as well as trying to improve the profitability, which was my strength in working with people. So I really tried to capitalize on those skills I had.
What you just said about starting with the end in mind is some of the best advice I've ever heard. That is so key, because I ask people all the time, what are your mid and long-term goals? And people don't always have an answer. I ask them those questions because as a recruiter, I need to guide them in positions that will help them achieve their goals. But if you don't know your goals, if you don't know the end goal, how are you going to get there? And or do you just take the next job? Well, maybe I'm supposed to be a senior accountant, or maybe I'm supposed to do this, but you actually, you like said, I need to work for a big company, I need to work for a small company. That is, that's commendable. I think that shows a tremendous amount of maturity, and then also problem solving. So that's such great advice for people that are younger on. Look into it. And that's why I did the show. Like, how do people get there? What did they do? Where are they now? So that brilliant. That was fantastic.
No, I appreciate that. And I mentor, people too out of school. We have a Next Step internship program where I work at Cambridge. We've had hundreds of interns come through. We're growing the Iowa office, we're growing the Phoenix office, a lot of second internships, a lot of full-time hires, where I mentor them. And that's my question to them is, hey, where do you want to be in 20 years? Have you thought about that? And if they don't know why, like, that's one feedback I want them to take away from that internship, to get some of that exposure in the real business environment, but ensure they're not like me and you, like biology students who are meant to be, a recruiter or in finance, accounting, or sales, but getting to know themselves and where they want to go and why is 50% of the equation there.
And so many of them don't have the answer, right? How many of them have, I got this game plan? Very few, right?
Very few. And that's the question I have. And I said, regardless of whether or not you have a game plan now, I at least want you to think about that after this internship. But while you're here, I want you to crush it. Like, I want you to do this job like your life depends on it, because in some ways it might. Like, depending on how well you do in this internship might open up many doors for you in the future through your network, through your experience, and it could close doors as well. And it's a low risk, high reward environment where you're coming as an intern. We don't have these high expectations for you. So it could be a matter of you just crushing your job, whether you're a developer, an accountant, an engineer. And what I tell them is crush your job, but what's your passion project? Like, what can you do on the side that you can collaborate with others in the business to get that exposure, to really get it noticed, but get to know yourself and see what you can do. And that, to me, that's the difference between an A and B player. A B player, be very good at what they do, crush it, but maybe they're not looking at other avenues they can do. And it might take you a little more time, but again, it's risk reward.
But again, not everybody has aspirations, and that's okay, right? If they just want to come in and be a solid contributor and not move into a leadership role, there's going to always be a place for them, and that's fine too. I don't want anybody to feel like guilty if they don't want to be a CFO. Not everybody wants to be a CFO. We could do a whole podcast of the challenges being a CFO, right?
Yeah, I have no hair, so that's challenge number one, right? But secondly, to your point, the Bulls, they were a good team that worked well together. If you had multiple Michael Jordans on that team, there'd probably be a whole lot of missed opportunities for shots, assists, defense. And to me, that's what made the Bulls great. You need your Steve Kerrs, people who you can count on, who maybe aren't out there to score every time, but when you have 3 seconds left in the game, you know they can make the free throws or the three-pointer. Dennis Rodman, who's getting the rebounds? Phil Jackson, who's coordinating everything? You need Scottie Pippen, take some pressure off Jordan so he's not getting double-teamed the whole time. So, like, to me, like that, as people grow in their career too, you need to think about, how do I become that Phil Jackson coach and build those teams? Because I can't have all Michael Jordans because the team might just not mesh well together.
Amen. Amen to that. So we don't have time to go into every job, but you kind of ran up through the accounting side of things as opposed to the finance side of things. Did you ever want to be on the finance side? To kind of walk me through that progression.
Yeah, I think I was a little intimidated to begin with because coming out of school, I focused on accounting, where I had a lot of people who focused on finance. And I think there was a difference maybe in my conception of what it meant to be in finance. That when I saw finance, I thought banking, and I'm like, I don't want to go into banking. But as I kind of came up in my career, I learned more about FP&A, that department. What are the analytics they're doing? How are they helping sales teams grow? How are they doing month-to-month forecasting and budgeting? So that was a skill set I had to learn. So I was a controller at Huddle at that time. We just raised a whole lot of money through a private equity funding round led by, we had Excel partners in there who helped found Facebook. And there was a really, really brilliant former CFO that sat on our board from Excel. And he's like, hey, Ryan, like, you have all these skills. He's like, if you want to be a CFO one day, you just need to learn the FP&A side and you're there. So I really took it upon myself to just kind of on the side, learn things. And it naturally came pretty simple to me, but you had to live that life a little bit to kind of understand it, being in some of those meetings and focus on the forecast budget. So to me, that was probably the road I decided to go down a little bit at my career later, just understanding that to get better.
Yeah, that makes sense, because my question was going to be, it's harder, in my opinion, from what I've seen, to get to the CFO office going the accounting route, as opposed to traditionally most people are coming through the finance route. So what did you do? You took on the FP&A for Huddle. Is that what you did to learn that side?
Yeah, I took that on in conjunction with another FP&A analyst. But so at that time, I had to create, with bringing on a private equity partner, we had to improve all our board reporting, all our forecasting, a lot of other metrics the board wanted to see. So I just really integrated myself into that process and worked together with that department to build it. But then I took that ownership and responsibility of it to present it. And anytime I present something to a board, I always try to think devil's advocate, like what questions am I going to get asked? So I had to really dig in to understand it, and it kind of just forced me to really learn it. And to your point, I think traditionally it's a little harder for an accountant to go up that ladder to a CFO. Because if you think about it, the way I always think about it is the accounting are more of the history tellers, right? They told you, here's what happened, good baseline for the financials, where the FP&A department is more of the future tellers and where things going and why. And that's where, to me, if you can blend both of those together to understand the history, the past, but you also need to know what's going on in today's environment, internally in the business and externally, to tell the business where it's going in the future. But the biggest thing is becoming a storyteller. And I think that's where you really need to grow in your career. How do I tell those stories? How do I simplify things in a way that a fifth grader could understand this? Because there's a lot of times where I have been on the accounting research side, looking at Rev Rec issues for years, documenting everything perfectly, and then I go try to explain it to the business. I talk way over their head. And I've had that feedback from CFOs, fortunately, who gave me that feedback growing up. And I ran with that feedback and I said, okay, I'm going to go explain this to my niece and nephew. How am I going to do this? I talk about lemonade stands a lot, hypothetical situations. I talk easy numbers, and I just try and ensure that I can speak their language to connect and persuade and tell stories, because it's pretty much pointless for me to know this information if I can't drive a different decision for them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, got to be a good storyteller. So you have a CFO, a great CFO, that was a board member telling you that you could be a great CFO. What qualities did that person see in you that you believe? Obviously, you're not in their shoes. What do you think they saw in you that they knew that you would be a good CFO?
Well, so I think sometimes when private equity gets involved, they really get to know management to ensure the right people are in the seat. And at that time, I was a controller, kind of interim CFO, because we didn't have a CFO at that point in time. And he really came in and interviewed me and tried to challenge me on different topics. But I was fortunate enough where I've worked with outside advisors, KPMG, the Deloittes of the world, where I knew the rules in and out. He really tried challenging me on some transfer pricing and how it would work if we moved IP out of Australia into Europe for better tax benefits. And I really pushed back, and I told him why and what the differences are. And he'd come back and challenge me on this point. But I already knew the answer back to that, to the point where he couldn't challenge me anymore. And he agreed, and he told me, he's like, I need someone like you in this seat that can push back and have those facts and do it in a way that you did it that didn't offend me. So little did I know he was trying to test me to see if I was probably the right fit in that role. But coming from him, who's a very successful CFO at a very large company in Australia, kind of helped me get over imposter syndrome a little bit, because I was fairly young in my career, came from an accounting manager role, got this job as a controller for a really fast growing company. And that was the first time in my life I've really managed people before. And I think I probably had the business foundational skill sets to do it correctly, but I didn't necessarily have the emotional intelligence and experience to do as well as I wanted. So I think hearing that from him gave me more confidence in myself that, hey, I can do this. It was something I could always draw back on in those high pressure moments in board meetings where you're like, hey, why am I here? You can then reflect on, hey, this person believes in me. I should believe in me too.
Awesome. So do you think you had just a natural curiosity to learn everything about the business that helped you handle that challenge that he was giving you?
Absolutely. I think to me, and this is a quality I always look in for candidates, whether they're freshly out of school or coming from somewhere else, is just how curious are they? Are they going to settle for status quo and do things the way they've always been done? Same as last year, the Sally effort. Or are they going to look at things, ask questions, understand the why? And again, I think that's getting back to, everyone knows the how, the what, but kind of the why, the core issue. You really kind of need to understand sometimes to find the solution. So I see that as part of the process of looking for candidates. And I think within myself too, Just always understanding the why, because I think sometimes you're in enough board meetings with bright people, they want to know the why. So you can get put in the spot in those situations. And that one time it happens where you don't know that answer, you're going to learn really fast to know that answer next time. So as you're naturally going through your day and you're seeing things that don't look right, and sometimes that's a nice thing from a numbers perspective, you might hear different things or people are telling you one thing or another, but you look at the numbers and things don't make sense. And that's where you can ask a question as to why and keep going deeper and deeper until you find the root. And that's where you might be able to help the business or at least answer a board question when you're in the meeting.
Right. Awesome. So you touched upon it already. You became a leader. You became a manager. Were you good at it?
To begin with, I would say I was not great at it. There's some things like you don't learn in college. You don't learn from maybe your managers of how to manage maybe crucial conversations or different team dynamics. Sometimes there's dramas that's happening that you really need to learn how to crush. Sometimes you might have underperformers where those are hard conversations to have. I probably had some low performers on my team longer than I should have that were dragging people down, probably didn't address it as fast as I should have. And then looking back, I'm like, wow, why didn't I address that faster? Because at the time you're looking at your team, some are just bad cultural fits too. They might be great at what they do, but if their behavior isn't there or they're bringing other people down, that can have a larger impact to the team where you need to kind of think what's best for your company and team. And you have to keep sometimes your emotions out of it to a degree, but in all respect, you need to give that person an opportunity to take that feedback and grow or figure out where they live, because that might not be the right role for them either. But kind of thinking utilitarian, like what's the best thing for the group, I would say I was not great at right away. And I had a lot of those hard experiences, a lot of stress, wasn't necessarily working with people, but trying to understand them and what was happening. And then after a few years going through some of those examples, you learn a lot about yourself and people and dynamics of a team, which really probably helped me down the road where when those things happen now, I can draw upon that experience and say, okay, here's what we should do and why. Sometimes it's gut and it's not always numbers based like accounting and finance, but a lot of that emotional intelligence and self-awareness, team dynamics you really have to keep in mind.
So besides trial and error, did you have any particular philosophy you followed, any books that were really impactful on you to becoming a better leader?
I always tried to read, you read those team books, self-help books. I can't say necessarily there was one book I was always drawn to. I did sometimes just talk to people who used to manage me or people who were retired or former CFOs. I would run those scenarios by them and they would give me their perspective and I would listen. So I tried to get a lot of different perspectives, and even talking to family, and they're like, they'd find the simplest answer and you're like, yeah, why didn't I think about that? So to me, it was probably more conversation and confiding in people, mentors more than anything.
Having a network and having mentors. That's a big key for you, it sounds like.
It was, even preparing for some of those board meetings, as a youngster, when I probably felt like I didn't belong in that spot, but I would go through my presentation with a couple different mentors before getting in that boardroom, and they would have some good pushback, good questions, or nice changes where I would roll with that feedback, which really helped me in those settings.
Gotcha. All right, so go back in time. You're interviewing for your first executive level position. What do you think was the key to having a successful outcome, meaning you got the job? What do you think the keys were for you going in?
Yeah, I can speak to my huddle role when I became controller. At that point in my life, I probably had 6 to 8 years of experience, 3 years of accounting manager experience, no controller experience, no startup experience, no software as a service experience, no global experience. But
so you're completely unqualified for the role.
Yeah, I shouldn't have been applying for this role. For me, honestly, I really applied. Well, I learned about this company while I was getting my MBA, and I was like, wow, these guys are super cool. They're in the sports world, software as a service. That's kind of, taking off. And I saw the role. I'm like, hell with it. I'm going to interview. At least I have a cool experience. But going into that, I think what made me stand out was my high energy, my positivity, and the cultural fit for what they were looking for. We're at that point in time, a lot of, I'm calling them gray hairs, seasoned vets, I can say that because I'm bald. They might have been way better than me technically, functionally, everything else, but they were horrible culture fits. Like they weren't looking for a CFO to tell them, hey, you guys can't grow and here's why. Where I kind of went in there with the other way is like, why can't you grow? How do we do this? How could we get you money? Hey, I don't have all these answers right now, but here's what I've seen in the past. I worked at ConAgra Foods or Lindsay Corporation or my times at Deloitte that I could draw upon in that interview. So I think it was a lot of what experiences had I had in my short career that I could bring to the table, even though it wasn't apples to apples, and what really made me stand out as a person, as a cultural fit for them, which, a lot of people hire for the person, not the paper. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Your paper gets you in the door, but people want to work with people they enjoy working with. So I think that's what maybe made me stand out at that point in time. That's what they told me. They're like, this person has this experience. They're way more qualified, but somehow they like you better. So come in for a second interview. So I got really lucky.
You brought the juice. That's what you got to do. You got to bring the excitement level, right?
Yeah, you do.
So did you find that through a recruiter like myself?
I did. Actually, the recruiter, I heard about the role, and then the recruiter came to me about it, and he had other candidates. And the whole time, he kind of kept my expectations pretty low, and he was shocked himself to even figure out they wanted to have a second interview with me, as much as I was. So that was pretty cool.
That's great. So you've already and you touched upon it as well. What you look for curiosity. Is there anything else when you're interviewing people? Are there specific questions that you like to ask that tell you if they're curious or not? Do you have like a go-to one or two questions that you use?
Yeah, so I generally look at their resume and people highlight things. So I'll find one thing in there and I'll dig really deep into that. So they might say, hey, I did this project during my internship that resulted in this. So I kind of just get them to open up a bit, get to know them like what you're doing here with me in the podcast. But then I'll start asking examples of that question. So you did this, like, how did you do that? And just hear what they have to say. And then I'll say, well, and then I'll challenge them. Well, what did, your boss think of that? Because the way I'm looking at this, I might have seen that differently. And then you kind of have to throw a curveball during that interview to let them draw on that experience more. But I think it's important in those interviews to be a better listener than talker. We've all been in those interviews where sometimes interviewers love to hear their own voice. And they will talk and talk and talk about themselves.
I'm guilty.
A lot.
I'm guilty of that.
and then it's funny because then like that candidate got 15 minutes to talk. It's like, how did you get to know them? So I think it's opening the window, asking open-ended questions. So I'll draw on a project. But then my second question will be, tell me about a stressful time, either in your education or work experience. Like just tell me about it. And then how did you handle that stress? How do you get over that? And then I'll ask, okay, when you're in these stressful moments in your life, like what do you do to re-energize yourself or get over that? Because getting back to cultural fit and working with people who let kind of that stress overtake everything, like that's something that's really hard to work through. So that person, if they can come into that interview and having some of that emotional intelligence and self-awareness where you can draw that out of them in the interview, I think says a lot about that person. Again, it's the whys, understanding things. And finally, I always try and ask them, well, why us? Why do you want to work here? Because I want to gauge how much research they've done. I want to know how well they've prepared. I'll start asking about our mission, our values. What do you think about that? Based on what you learned here, what would you change about our company if you were CEO? Tell me the methods you took to understand our company more and this role more. So for them to walk me through that process kind of tells me of how they're going to attack their work every day.
I'm taking notes. That's beautiful. Do you believe, or does somebody stand out to you more if they are to come back after the interview and send you a thank you email? Nobody writes handwritten notes anymore. They send you a thank you email. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm more of a note person. Kind of go back to the old-fashioned method of anyone can send an email. I could use Chat GPT right now. I could send you an awesome email, but I don't know if that's authentic or not. So if you do send an email, I would maybe draw about something in that interview that you guys had in common, or a question, or something they wanted to highlight, so I know like it was authentic. My last role, I was through at Cambridge probably 30 interviews in one day for the final interview. I wrote each of them a handwritten card thanking them, and to me, that's how I wanted to make myself stand out a little bit more with that personal touch.
Oh, anybody listening, taking notes, literally write notes. So that's great advice. It's so funny that in a world of email and text messages, how much a phone call stands out. That's a differentiator, and how much a handwritten note stands out as a major differentiator. Excellent advice right
Thank
there.
you.
That's impressive. So the question I love throwing in here is, you already touched on it briefly, but I know that it goes much deeper for you. What would you tell your younger self?
I took a lot of risks, in accounting and finance. I would have probably told myself, while you can still take risks, go start your own business. Give it a shot. Take 2 years, whatever that idea I may have had at that time. I had some ideas like, hey, what if I do a pet rental business, right? Or these other things. But if I would have stepped into that more and not worried about the risk as much, just knowing that life is short, you can afford to take these risks right now when other people aren't relying on you for income, I would have probably been an entrepreneur at some point and maybe had people working for me instead of working for them.
Tell me more. Like pet rental? Somebody just needs a pet for a day?
Yeah, it was like, hey, like, being even a single guy at that time, you're like, hey, like, I don't have much going on. What if I just had a pet I could walk through the park, right? But I don't want to own the pet. Like, how do I become an uncle, aunt to a pet? So I'm just like, I had this crazy idea of like, well, people could just put their pets in this program so they could rent them out for a day. So you do the background checks, you have an app. Because what if you just want a pet for like 8 hours a day and you want to bring them back? Kind of like being uncle or aunt. Same thing. Give the parent, you don't want to see them for a little bit, but give them back.
Oh, that's too funny. That's so funny. That's a great idea. Maybe you better go get the patent on that really quick before this airs. Or it's already live, so somebody's already on it.
Someone's taken it already.
Petrental.com. It's already been. It just got taken on GoDaddy.
Yeah, that's right. It's gone.
So besides being naturally curious, besides having mentors, networks, besides doing your research before you go into an executive level interview, is there any other advice that you would give? Did you do everything that you felt was the quickest way to get to the CFO title? I can't see anything that there is, but is there one thing that maybe you did that you felt hindered you, or what is that?
So I took on a lot of different opportunities. So I would go to a company 2 to 3 years, soak in things, but leave them better than I found them. But at the same time, I maybe could have grown myself more in a company, and that would have showed future employers more stability, because that was always a roadblock for me in the interview process. Well, I've seen you've been here 2 to 3 years, here 2 to 3 years. Why is that? So I always spoke to them. Well, I was trying to skill myself up with different skill sets. And I was kind of at that point where I didn't have to be a specialist in an industry, because I was still an up-and-comer where I could apply those skills everywhere. So as I grew in my career, my last role, I was in fintech for 6 years. Now I'm in financial services. I want to retire here. This is kind of my niche. So I think I would have told myself, one, maybe try staying at this company a little longer, working yourself up in maybe different departments, getting to know more people just to show some of that stability. And I think secondly is thinking about what's a good culture fit for you. Deloitte was an awesome company, but there was probably a better Big Four company culturally that was a better fit for me at that time that I turned down. A lot of it came to dollars and cents. So if I could go talk to myself, I'd say, what's $1,000 or $2,000 compared to the culture, the people you're getting into that are going to give you those right growth opportunities? To me, that, looking back, that's a little more important than just the dollars.
That is such sage advice. There's so many people, and I have a situation right now where somebody's taking the money, but will that ultimately make them happy? Will that be a good culture fit? So that's fantastic. I appreciate you sharing all this with me. Before we went on air, you asked me, what am I doing from the standpoint of the show? And I appreciate you asking me that. So I'm going to answer that.
Thank you.
So basically the reason that I'm doing this, I think I've said this before, but if anybody's listening for the first time, I'm doing this for the benefit of students and people that are junior in their career that haven't thought far out, or maybe they have thought far out and they still don't know how to get there. They want to hear how other people have done it. And now we're on our 14th show. We've got 14 examples, everybody kind of coming from different ways to show that there's not just one way to do it. Now, I am not a good promoter. I am extremely busy in my day-to-day job, but this is a passion for me that I want to help that next generation. I want to impact a lot of people. I don't want to impact just one at a time. That's great. And that's extremely meaningful because I am affecting somebody in the second most important thing in their lives, which is their career. If you don't have your career, you can't provide for your family. And I put faith in family number one, career number two. So I'm trying to impact a lot of people's careers by doing what we're doing right now, and you sharing, being so generous with your time to share your knowledge, which is so deep. And so how do I get more of that out there? Well, I'm going where the students and the people that are younger in their careers are that I'm not. They're on TikTok, a little bit of Instagram. There's a new thing called YouTube Shorts that we're on. And so we're promoting this. I have an intern that I hired from ASU, and she is out helping me amplify the voice to get it out to more people, to affect more people, because the knowledge that you shared today is so invaluable. You could almost probably write a book on it. So I appreciate you asking me that beforehand and then giving me the opportunity to take this time to tell everybody. So Financial Footsteps on TikTok. We do shorts on there because people don't have the attention span to sit down and listen from Led Zeppelin 2 from the beginning to the very end, right? And flip the tape over, flip the record over. It's sound bites. Everybody wants short stuff. And so that's what we're doing on TikTok, and we're getting a lot of success. We're getting more and more followers, and the more followers we get, the more they'll put it out to people, and the more people will be able to benefit from these types of conversations that we're having. So I thank you for asking me that and give me that opportunity.
No, I think that's really, really cool, Chad. I mean, me getting to know you, I think you just reaching out to ask me for coffee a little over a year ago and how much we connected, I can tell that you really care. And I think that's what makes you a really cool person, and appreciate you having me on the show too, so I can help people in their careers too. As I mentioned earlier, Cambridge Investment Research, we have 42 internship openings in 2025 for any type of role department. So you can hit me up on LinkedIn or go to our Cambridge website, but we'd love to have you join the team.
Awesome. That's a great promotion there. And I hope we'll cut that out and we'll put that out there. So, and I know your team will as well. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing your time today. You just said anybody can reach out to you on LinkedIn. It's Bowen, Boen. And I can be reached on LinkedIn as well. And Chad Dean. And that's it. We're gonna wrap this up.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Financial Footsteps, Candid Conversations with Financial Leaders. We encourage you to apply the knowledge and wisdom shared in these conversations to your own career. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your feedback is important to us as we continue to bring you more candid conversations and thought-provoking insights from successful financial leaders.